Okay, you can turn off the camera, mate.
Can I start?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So in that introduction is actually some halachas also. So it says here, if a person is suddenly faced with a monetary loss, for example, if his animals rebelled against him and ran off on Shabbos, or if he recently purchased geese or chickens that are not yet familiar with the surroundings of his house and therefore ran away. In these cases, he might easily stumble and violate the Torah prohibition of Seidah, which is called trapping, when he catches them. In this situation, it would be prohibited. It would even be prohibited to ask a non-Jew to catch them. If this person would have studied the laws of Shabbos, he would have known that the permitted way to deal with such a situation, i.e., is by announcing to non-Jews, anyone who saves them, who saves them, will not lose out. Alternatively, he could ask a non-Jew to cage the chickens or geese in an area where they are contained, but are not considered trapped according to Torah law. For example, he could confine them in a large building where they still cannot be easily caught by a person. Enclosing the animals in such a space does not violate the prohibition of trapping. This is because the Gemara teaches that confining an animal in a space where it still cannot be caught with a single lunge is not considered trapping according to Torah law. Okay. There's another one. Well, let's do another next time. Okay.
Yeah, 100%.
So that makes sense. That's the space. It's the size of the space. If it's in like a small room, then it's basically trapped. But if it's in a warehouse, but it can't escape and everything's locked, then it's almost roaming free in an enclosed environment.
We had to learn Rav's exposition, okay? And it was on the 65th daf. And we were basically learning that there was no need to have the word stolen article in live. Why not? I'm just testing you guys.
You caught me on a bad day. Kevin, please help. Sorry, I didn't sleep last night, Damon. I'm finished.
Okay.
Rick, sorry.
Stolen article and live. We've seen one of them is superfluous.
Correct. Which one?
The word live.
No, the word stolen article. Because if live came afterwards, and you're selling stolen article, which encompasses everything, which is a generalization, and then you go into a specification, what do you need the generalization for? Because technically, you're only talking about things that are living. So you would not need the word stolen article, because stolen article could imply inanimate objects and non-living. So if you say, listen, let's talk about stolen articles that I'm going to recompensate you for. And then I say, and living things. I don't need the word stolen articles because it already eliminates everything that isn't living. Because you've now gone from so general to specific, the general is being ignored. So it's superfluous. So then Rav said that the reason that it was added is that you basically had to revive the principle, the stolen article, to the point of when the item was alive. So I'll give you an example of what I'm saying. Because the text itself stated, as Rav said, a thief pays the principal according to the value of the stolen article when he stole it, and he pays a twofold payment, the fourfold payment and the fivefold payment according to the value of the stolen article at the time he's sued in court. So we want to know why there was that whole exposition, okay? Because the Torah stated that a thief has to pay twice the value of the article which he stole. We talk about for inanimate objects, etc., or donkeys even, or normal animals, right? Once for the article itself as restitution, and the second equivalent amount as a fine. So Rav is going to teach, as you know, that in the event that the article underwent a change in value, for example, an animal went in a change in value between the time that it was actually stolen and the time that the thief was sued in court, he pays the principal payment according to the article's value at the time of the theft. And then the second payment, which is the knas, the penalty. Now, in this case, Kevin asked the other day, well, why is it referred to as a kefil? So a kefil is referred to when it's a non-fixed penalty. We mean non-fixed in the sense that it depends what the principal restitution amount is. A normal knas is a fixed amount, like for a rapist or a what do you call it? An informer or something like that, where you've got 50, hundreds of. In this case, your penalty is based on your primary principal. It's just times exponentially, either by 2, by 4, by 5. So that's known as a kef. So what we're saying there is this: the principal amount can only be based on what occurs at the time of the theft, because that, in fact, is restitution, mida keneged mida, for what was stolen. It's got to match it. But if the article underwent some sort of price change, the penalty payment of your 2-fold or 4-fold or 5-fold has to reflect what the value is when you sued in court. So what we're going to establish is, does it only work one way? This is what Kevin asked, which was a great question the other day. He said, does it only work that the thief is penalized where if the article accrues value or increases in value, that you pay that additional sum in the kefil payment, the penalty payment? Or do we say that if the article, well, no, Kevin asked the converse. We were discussing depreciation. So obviously if the thief starved the animal or caused the depreciation, it's not fair to the owner that he takes a loss because the thief was negligent with his article and let it deteriorate in value, his animal. So therefore, he would have to make restitution on the principle of what it was worth in a higher value when he stole it, because that replaces it mida keneged mida. But as far as the penalty is concerned, don't necessarily make him pay for what it was worth at the time that it was stolen. We make him pay for what it was worth at the time when the issue was taken up into court. But the Gemara is going to bring up a certain issue. Well, that certain issue before Kevin's question comes into play is that why is it fair that the person who was stolen from doesn't get the penalty at the higher amount? Because in fact, his animal was mistreated by the thief. So therefore, that pays the thief to starve the animal, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, because your principal is only a small amount compared to your 4 or 5-fold payment. So why should the owner take a knock if the thief was abusive to the animal? That's the one question. The other question that gets asked, like Kevin, is what happens if the thief actually did a good job and increased the value of due to his effort? And what we learned last time is if it was due to his effort, then the thief doesn't have to pay that extra, because why should the owner of the article benefit from the thief's extra money? However, if the improved value was due to a price fluctuation in the market, or it had to do with the animal's normal development, the thief has to pay it. So if you say it's unfair to the thief, it's not unfair in that case, because the owner, if he had the article originally, would have the higher benefit of the article or the lower benefit according to the price fluctuation. And if the animal went mature, Kevin also asked if the animal went from a ram to obviously, like a little sheep or whatever, to a ram with horns and fully sexually developed, and was now a breeding animal and worth more, what happens then? And we say that, no, the thief must pay for it. And if you think it's unfair for the thief, it's not, because at the end of the day, the animal has now developed a higher level of value because it's gone through endocrinological changes and development. And then in terms of animal husbandry, is able to breed, etc. However, we did discuss a point that if the animal is there, the thief hasn't lost anything, because all he would have to do is replace it with the article that was stolen, and then he doesn't have to make up the shortfall in his own cash. It's only if he sells or slaughters it. But now we're still trying to determine the issue what happens if it's delayed in court, etc. So we're just going to go through that argument again, and now we're going to add layers to the argument. Am I making sense to you guys?
Yeah.
Kevin, you were very sharp last time. You were sharper than a samurai sword. So,
sharper than a Casio calculator.
Yeah,
that's exactly. Spot on. Well done, Kevin.
Exactly.
Okay.
So
that's their slogan.
That's their slogan. So Rav is teaching that in the event of the article and it underwent a change in value between the time that it's stolen and the time that the thief was sued in court, he pays the principal payment according to the article's value at the time of the theft. And then the second payment, or the penalty payments, the kefil, according to the article's value at the time he's sued in court. So let's just take an example. If you steal a keg of wine and it's worth 4 zuzim, and the value of the keg subsequently decreases to 1 zuz at the time that the case is brought to court, he pays 4 zuzim as actual restitution for the principal and 1 zuz for the kefil payment. Okay, because it's an article, it's not a sheep or an ox. So,
Damon.
Yeah.
So the point is, he shouldn't have stolen it in the first place. It's a bit of a chutzpah to dispute the value of what his penalty should be. If he stole it, if he wouldn't have stolen it, it wouldn't have got to the situation. So he shouldn't have even have the right to dispute difference in value or what he should be penalized for.
Okay, so I think Kevin's got a good point in that what makes him claim righteous indignation since he's a thief.
Yeah.
So the reality is there is a principle in law that the crime, the punishment has to fit the crime. So in the old days in England, if you remember, you read that a guy is chayiv misa for theft. And if you remember Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist. Now, Oliver Twist is not like the musical. The original Charles Dickens novel was a very dark novel. And Fagin, which was a very anti-Semitic depiction of Jews, was the carer of these misfits and orphans. And basically, why he got the orphans to steal from him, apart from being good pickpockets, is that if Fagin stole directly, you'd be hanged. So what would happen is they would hang for pickpocketing. Now, pickpocketing, when you desperate street urchins, and then pickpocket, okay, so they stole a bit of this or that, but they don't deserve to die at the end of the rope. So it's actually the difference between a civil, humane society and a brutal society is, to a certain extent, the fairness at which we treat criminals. You cannot give the death penalty for theft. It's a little excessive. This is the problem I actually had that I didn't understand in Sanhedrin, that it said a goy is chayiv misa for theft. It really did.
So in that situation, Damon, they had to take that into consideration.
Yeah, very funny. No, but on a serious note.
Yeah, you're right. No, of course, they definitely took it into consideration.
Is that there has to be a certain level of fairness. And I'll tell you what the implication is. If you didn't have money as a Jewish thief, you would have to then work for somebody for 7 years to pay back the debt. Okay? If
the Jewish slave, yes.
Yes. Now, although you were treated well, you had to separate from your wife and children. Now, if it found that you can't dispute the amount, say you had 100 zuz, and the claimant was prosecuting the defendant, accusing him of theft, and for 200 zuz, but the thief had 100 zuz. Now, if he was 100 zuz short and he couldn't pay, he'd lose his life for years as servitude, and he'd have to separate from his wife and children. So then in that case, the thief has got a claim and saying, listen, you've got to be fair. If I stole X from you, I've got to pay back X, not Y. It could really impact on his life. So he did wrong, yes, but it has to match, the punishment has to match the crime. Fair enough, guys, before we go back on.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, you steal a keg of wine worth 4 zuz at the value, and the value of the keg when it came to court is 1 zuz. So what happens if you have to pay 4 zuz for the actual restitution amount, because that's what it was worth at the time it was stolen? That's the principal. And the 1 zuz for the kefil payment, for the penalty payment. Okay, so if you steal and then slaughter or sell an ox or a sheep, you become liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment, which consists of the principal plus 3 times the value of a sheep and 4 times the value of the ox. You pay the principal according to the animal's value at the time of the theft. An additional fine according to the animal's value at the time he's sued in court. So if you stole an ox worth 200 zuz, and then you subsequently sold it or slaughtered it after it decreased in value to 100 zuz, you pay the 200 zuz as restitution for the principal, and another 400 zuz because of the depreciation in value for the ox's subsequent value for the fine. So you're still paying much more than you stole, guys, by the way. So the main purpose of Rav's ruling is to teach about the second half, meaning the penalty, the kefil, that the 2-fold, 4-fold, and 5-fold payments are paid according to the article's value at the time the thief is sued in court. And the principal payment is paid according to the value at the time of the theft. And that's already contained in the Mishnah in 93b. And it states all robbers pay according to the article's value at the time of theft. Okay. Now, there is something important to note. When Rav says that the principal payment is paid according to the stolen article's value at the time of the theft, he only refers to when the thief is paying compensation for the principal, but not returning the stolen article itself, right? So in other words, we're saying that the stolen article is extant, or it's broken, or it's no longer in the thief's possession, whatever the case may be. But if the stolen article is in the thief's possession and it's in its original state, he returns the article as is. It doesn't matter the present's worth. Why? Because he's fulfilled his obligation of repaying the principal. So again, article was worth basically 4 zuz, okay, for the keg of wine. It's now depreciated in the market because instead of importing the wines from California, there's a new vineyard in Cape Town that's producing the same. So the price has dropped for Chardonnay, and now it's worth 1 zuz. Now, the thief, if he didn't have the original bottle, a keg of wine, he'd have to pay 4 zuz because that's what it was worth at the time of theft. Why? Because the principal, as the owner, could have had the opportunity to sell it before the price dropped. But if he still has the article intact, he hasn't stolen anything. He just returns what he took. So then the loss, unfortunately, is the homeowner's, because he's getting the article back. He's made restitution, technically. You get what I'm saying? Yes, he's deprived him of that opportunity where he could have sold it. But you remember learning in Pesachim about that article during the time of Chometz and the loss of the time period. We learned that already. The thief doesn't have to make restitution for that. You remember that, guys?
Yeah, sort of.
Okay. So, the Gemara now explains what is Rav's reasoning for ruling this way. The verse states the words Geneva v'chayim, stolen article in love, which is apparently superfluous. Okay, I explained to you why. Now, why does the merciful one state live with respect to the stolen article? So that we may expound, revive the principle, in other words, the stolen article, to be as it was when he stole it. Okay? Meaning that the term stolen article denotes specifically that the stolen article itself and not any additional payments for it. In other words, we're saying the only thing that has to be revived to its original state in terms of financial loss is the actual principle, but not the knas, not the kefer, the penalty payment. Okay, so that's the first thing that you got to know. But in other words, the principle has to be whole, as in the time of theft. So Tosfot teaches us two things with this exposition. Firstly, it tells us to revive the principle to make it whole, as it is in the time of theft. And second, it tells us that we revive the principle only, but not the twofold, fourfold, or fivefold payments, which are therefore paid in accordance with the stolen article's value at the time the thief is sued in court. Okay, makes sense, guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just repeat that again, please.
Okay, so we learn from that exposition of basically stolen article in live. We say we don't need the word stolen article because if you're paying just for live, stolen article as a generalization becomes irrelevant because you're now paying for only things that are living. Okay, so as far as that's concerned, we say that it can't be meaning it literally because it would be a repetition. So what we have to say is you have to revive the principle, the stolen article, to be as it was when he stole it. What do we mean revive? Is that whatever the value was at the time of theft, you have to make restitution on the principal amount for the same value. And that would even come to include non-living, because in other words, anything, it's termed live as in what the living value was at the time. So when we talk about a keg of wine, we're saying at that moment in time, freeze frame, that's what the article was worth. And we have to revive the principle exactly to that point, but not, as Tosfot said, the penalty payments. That could be on the depreciated value at the time of court, whether it's a twofold, fivefold, or fourfold. Do you get what I'm saying, Kev? If you don't, I can say it in another way. It's not a problem.
Mine's off. Because it's like late, I'm not picking up everything. So say it again.
I think I got it. Can I say something?
Of course.
I think this is what you said. I'm sorry, I'm battling it. I think this is what you said. You said that what's it called?
What do you mean?
Sorry, I've gone blank.
If it was a twofold or fourfold or fivefold payment, is that what Damon's talking about?
So what Damon is saying is that the value of the original article is done at the court date, whereby the penalty won't necessarily match the original, what do you call it?
No, I'm not saying
the principle.
The principle. But this is what I thought you said. I thought you said that amount is whatever the value of the amount of that animal or whatever that living thing was at the time of then, and it depreciated. You take that depreciation into account for the penalty. That's what you said, but you don't do that for the principal.
Correct. You don't. Okay, you don't do that for the. That's exact. Sorry, you said at the time of the court date, so that threw me off, and then you corrected it at the end. Perfect.
Okay.
So Gavin is saying, Kev, the following is that look, a keg of wine worth 4 zuz. I come and steal the keg of wine. Okay. Months later, they're witnesses or whatever the case may be, and I go to court. Now it's dropped to 1 zuz. So I have to pay you back the time it was worth when I stole it, which would be 4 zuz. But now I have to pay a penalty of the because it's an article and it's not a fourfold or fivefold payment, it's a twofold. So the restitution being the principal, I have to pay you at the time frame when I stole it, which was worth 4. But now that it's only worth a zuz, the penalty payment I only have to pay at the time frame of the court hearing, which is 1 zuz. So that would be my penalty. Do you get what I'm saying? In other words, I've got to pay what that keg of wine would be worth now in terms of the penalty payment. But the actual principal, I pay at what at the time that I stole it.
But those are twofold payments. It would be two zuz then.
It is. So no. Let me give you an example. If there was no fluctuation in price and I took a 4 zuz keg of wine, I would have to pay 8 zuz. 4 zuz for the principal and 4 zuz for the penalty. But now when you take in market-related price fluctuations, I have to pay back the 4 zuz of the principal at the time where I stole it. But now we determine the penalty payment at what the article is worth at the court date. And now it's dropped to 1 zuz, your keg of wine. So I'd only have to pay again for that article of the current value, which would be 1 zuz.
And if it exceeds, do you have to do they cap it at the original amount, or if it exceeds, you okay?
No, if it
exceeds, you got to pay more than the original principal, though.
Absolutely. But we're gonna go into it and learn it. Listen, guys, it's late. I can see that Kev, Arthur's hectic now. You were very patient with me. I'm sorry about this. We'll go from this point. As long as you can see that the penalty is, it's not that you're not paying the twofold payment, because again, we're judging the value of the article. I'm making
at the time of the court date.
No. I'm at court now. They say to me, what date did you steal it at? And I say the 6th of June. Okay? So they say, what was that value of a Chardonnay 1989 on the 6th of June? That was worth 4 zuz. Fine, I have to pay you the 4 zuz. Now the penalty is not another 4 zuz. It says, what is that Chardonnay worth now? And you'd say it's dropped down to 1 zuz, and the court says why? And the appraiser says that basically that wine was imported from California, but there's a glut in the market because there's a winery that's opened up in Cape Town that's offering their old stock at the same sort of price. So the market's flooded, it's dropped to 1 zuz. So now the penalty is worked out to what that article is worth now during the court date.
The penalty saying total is 5 zuz.
Yes.
Okay, okay. Yeah, the penalty. Okay, it's the penalty what they're calculating.
Yeah.
Based on the value, the current value.
Okay, so let me try and see if we can press on a little bit and see how you feel. We've got 10 minutes left. So the Gemara challenges Rav Sheish, Rav's ruling from a brisa. Okay, Rav Sheish said, I say that Rav stated this law when he was drifting into sleep, otherwise he would not have stated it. And as I said the other day, it wasn't an insult to Rav, it was a compliment. Because Rav Sheish says Rav is so astute that unless he was falling asleep when he said it and not thinking clearly, he would never said such a thing. So it was a compliment to Rav. But it's clearly that he doesn't agree with Rav, right? Because Rav Sheish learns in a different brisa, if a thief stole a lean animal and the thief fattened it, okay? In other words, the thief decided to feed it more, Kevin, than the average diet. And it becomes fattened. In other words, it wasn't enough to keep it alive and the animal naturally developed, because that the thief doesn't get the benefit for. Animals naturally grow and develop, but he fed it excessively, so it developed a heavy weight compared to the timeline of the development of the animal. I think the best example to use is a fully developed animal, because then it's not going to confuse the issue, just in the first explanation. He pays the twofold, fourfold, and fivefold payment according to his value when he stole it. So what it's actually coming to say there is that apparently contradicts Rav, because Rav rules that the fourfold and fivefold payment are assessed according to the value of the stolen article at the time the thief is sued in court. So the Gemara at this point understands Rav's ruling as pertaining to all the cases of increase or decrease in value, even where the change in value is brought about directly by the thief. Okay, as Rashi explains, that's where we're holding. But the Gemara says it's different in this case, because the thief can say to the owner, I fattened it up and you will take the payment. Basically meaning that the Torah penalizes the thief to pay the twofold, fourfold, or fivefold penalty only for the article that he stole. In this case, it can't be considered that he stole the additional fat, because it wasn't the natural development of the animals, because the thief fed it excessively, and therefore, since he has to make restitution, and the animal increased in value due to the thief, why should the owner of that article get to benefit? It's different in a case, Kevin, where the animal increases its value, because you asked me this the other day, because in its natural development. So it became from a small animal to a sexually mature animal, or it developed naturally, or there was a price fluctuation that beef was worth 4 zuz a kilogram and now it's worth 6 zuz a kilogram. Then obviously the thief pays, but he doesn't have to pay the extra to the original owner of the article if he was the one that fed it excessively and the thief looked after it. That's what it's saying. So it's actually no contradiction to Rav. Because, so then the Gemara is going to throw another challenge to Rav. It says, come learn a proof from the following brisa. If a thief stole a fat animal and he caused it to become lean, he pays a twofold, fourfold, or fivefold payment according to its value when he stole it. So that seems a little bit different, because there he either beat it, overworked it, starved it, and that seemingly contradicts Rav's ruling, because we're saying that it's assessed in accordance with the stolen article's value at the time that the thief is sued in court. Okay, if it lost weight. Whereas Rav said it's at the time of theft. So Rav's saying that a thief isn't entitled to benefit to get off the hook by starving the animal. And if the animal lost value, that's the thief's problem. He has to make restitution of the healthy animal at what it was worth at the time of theft. If the animal loses weight, and this is seeming to say that it's judged, it's judged at a slightly different point of time. So the Gemara says it's different, because we can say to the owner, what difference does it make to me whether he killed the animal entirely or whether he killed it halfway? Meaning, if you starve an animal, it's considered an act of slaughter. Okay? And therefore, if it's a sheep or goat, a sheep or ox, you're liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. But that's meant to have considered to be gone the minute the animal was weakened, according to Rashi. So, the value at where do we take that value from? At the act of slaughtering beginning, meaning when this animal begins to weaken the animal, they beat it or he starved it, and that was at the beginning of that period of the prolonged act. So the brisa apparently refers to specifically when the thief weakened the animal and then slaughtered it, but not where he sold it, because where he sold it is where he got the meat. So listen, we'll continue the nuance of this. We've got 4 minutes left, but I think everybody's fading, and I'm so sorry, guys. I'm really sorry.